Sun storms inside our head. There are still lower level flares, C-class solar flares, that are taking place on the sun these days. And perhaps I should move on to other topics like the flowers of spring here in Michigan. However, this huge series of flares, coupled with the 3 eclipse times that we're having right now, has caused a lot of disturbance in many people's minds, and in myself as well. Like the sun itself, my own self is in flux just now. With that, almost an apology instead, I feel like continuing this thread on the self and the changes of the self. Can you imagine what pours through our mind stream, our stream of consciousness, even in a single day? Mind stream is more like a mind river, or at times even a storm surge. And what remains? Not much. Some impressions and maybe selected memories. Those memories, however, are not all nostalgia either. We are equally imprinted by, or we remember the good and the bad and the ugly. And the tip of the top, the best of the lot of our memories, whether loved or hated, are reserved for what we could call the museum of ourself. And then this is not even to mention all our fixations. As I like to say to myself, attachment is the glue that holds the self together. And if something really impacts me, for better or for worse, it becomes part of myself, and I begin to identify it as me. And that, my friends, is sticky. Again, don't fool yourself into thinking that our self is made up only of treasured or much loved moments. It's not all about what we like or dislike. It's not all about nostalgia. Once we identify with something, good or bad, and it's up to us entirely, it goes into the closet of the self and remains there until somehow its memory is worn out of existence, or we can release it. And that can be a long time. Like a sore tooth, we keep peeking by our reactions, to see if it's still sensitive. And that it's that, our own looking at it, our own cringing, that's what keeps it forever on our mind. And we further underscore it every time it comes up and we react again. And this really is the nature of the self. And the key to freedom from self-dependence, to being overly self-dependent, is the fact that the self is composed of many distinct impressions. And it's not simply a unified whole entity like we imagine, myself. Like the seeds in a sunflower, and there are many, each of our reactions is a separate seed or impression. Because the self is effectively blind, it has no overview of its own self, meaning that it's not an entity. Because of that, it can be successfully deconstructed one memory at a time, or one reaction at a time. And this is the beauty of the Dharma practice called Tong Len. And I have been describing it in recent posts and have written a little book about it. It's free for anyone that wants it. Anyway, as mentioned, the self is not of one piece. There's no over-self. And the individual pieces that make up the self are not all of the same degree of imprint. Some are stronger or deeper, while others are lighter or weaker. And we don't have to go searching through ourself for ways to liberate it, not a bit. Instead, the only requirement for self-liberation, or whatever we want to call it, is to begin to develop a little awareness, which simply means to become more aware of what comes to our attention throughout the day. That's all we have to do to begin unraveling the knot of the self. Every reaction that we have throughout our day is based on something that we previously identified with enough to register or log it into ourself as good, bad, or neutral, indifferent. So when we bump into that attachment again on the road of life and we react, simply look at the reaction and do some Tonglen with it. And here Tonglen is as simple as acknowledging the reaction, that we're having one, accepting it as our own reaction, our own projection, embracing it or taking it in, and then sending out good energy in response. In other words, make peace with our own. We should make peace with our own reactions, one by one. And we can do it just as we go through our day, because, every time we react, we have that space to look at the reaction. Tonglen is the Mahayana Buddhist practice for the type of self-liberation that I'm describing here. While in Vajrayana Buddhism, another form of meditation practice that's used for this is called Mahamudra, and they both work fine. As pointed out, we don't have to dig in or hunt through the memory collection of ourself for sensitive hotspots to do Tonglen with. It's enough to just relax and allow the self to bring events to mind, one reaction at a time as our day unfolds. Just watch the show. With our perpetual fountain of reactions, we can undo attachment to the self, a response at a time. Now, this may take quite a while, but we can mix this practice with our daily life, our routine. In fact, that's the preferred way to do it, like all day long. As each reaction comes to mind, as we are aware that we are reacting, we just neutralize it with some Tonglen to kind of take the starch out of it. One reaction at a time to kind of neutralize it and lessen it. And sure, there's some deep identifications that will take years of repeated treatment, months or years or whatever. But by attending to the reactions that bloom in the moment, gradually, like a glacier melts, we will reduce the frozen mass of the self to something manageable, and it will just naturally thin out and become more transparent. We begin to see through it for the first time. So our goal is not to deny or get rid of the self. The Buddhists say that can't be done anyway, because we would just have to go out and invent another personal assistant to help us get through the day. The self is a necessary middleman, but it doesn't have to get in the way like it often does. So what we want to do is tone down the attachment to the self, thin it out or prune it until it's no longer an obstacle, until it doesn't stand in our way. In time, the self will become increasingly transparent, and we can gradually see through it and begin to identify with the awareness beyond and behind it. Our innate awareness surrounds the self, and not vice versa. Now, as an added bonus, concurrent with this process of deconstructing the self, we also end up transferring our consciousness. And this is pretty crucial. We end up transferring our consciousness from attachment to the self, and we begin to learn to identify with the pure awareness that's our mind, rather than composite self that we've created and drawn around us like a persona. In fact, the deconstructing of the self is simultaneous with our taking up the vantage point of a more pure awareness. And this is what's called the process of enlightenment.